Okay, so firstly, this video is inspired by Atheism is Unstoppable. It's a great channel. I'll post a link in the description below. I recommend you all explore the channel. His videos are very humorous and they're quite well made as well. I'm basically going to be using this channel to talk about a range of various topics. It's mainly going to be about politics and religion. Okay, so my first video is going to be about Katy Sian. For those who don't know who she is, I suggest you Google her. She's a left-wing author and she likes to think of herself as an intellectual on racism. But in reality, she's actually a pseudo-intellectual racist. And I'll be using this video to explain why. You might wonder why I'm actually doing a video about Katy. I mean, she's a nobody, not many people take her seriously, and she doesn't really have a great Twitter following either. So my answer to that is this is my first video, and it's moreover just to get a practice of making videos and compiling them. When you start at the gym, when you start your session, you usually begin with a little warm-up. You jog on the spot, you do a few stretches, you lift a few light dumbbells. Likewise, I feel that I'm using Katy Sian as a punch bag or as a sparring partner in preparation for my later videos, which I'll be covering. I'll be covering some of the more well-known people out there. Some people who are actually credible in the things which they say and are taken seriously, but people who I obviously have disagreements with. Okay, to begin with, let's take a look at her Twitter page. You can see that most of the sources which she uses are from The Guardian. Now, for those of you who don't know, The Guardian are a left-wing newspaper in the UK, and to be fair, they talk some sense on various issues. They do have a bit of credibility, but their agenda is usually very clear and very obvious. And now it seems like she's tweeted about 100 or 200 articles from The Guardian. I mean, it seems as though she just goes to the Guardian website and looks for any random article which is to do with race or racial discrimination, and it seems like she just copies that and pastes it onto her Twitter feed. It could be that she's not aware that Guardian also have their own Twitter page, and it would have saved her a lot of time if she just went to the page itself and retweeted all of the items. It could be that she's tweeting so many of the Guardian's articles because perhaps one day she would like to see herself working there. But if you ask me, that's pretty stupid. I personally wouldn't employ somebody who just keeps on tweeting my articles. I'd like to employ somebody who has good critical thinking skills, who's well balanced, who's well read, who's nuanced, who formulates their opinion on various issues and from a variety of different sources, not just one single issue from the same site. Okay, on to the next point. Her banner pic, as you can see over here, is a pic of Layla Khalid. Layla was basically a Palestinian airline hijacker who was involved in the taking over of TWA Flight 840 in 1969. Now, I don't think that's a very good advertisement. I'm pretty sure that The Guardian, even The Guardians, as left-wing as they are, they would at least have the decency to condemn such an act. So, according to her biography, she is anti-racism, anti-colonialism, anti-Zionism, anti-Orientalism, and anti-imperialism. Okay, so yes, I'm an anti-racist as well. I'm not a fan of colonialism either, being somebody of Indian descent. But Zionism, on the other hand, well, the Israel-Palestine issue is a complex one, but being a secularist, I guess I'm not in favor of Zionism either. But I wonder why she hasn't put down anything to do with anti-Islamism. Islamism is a very serious threat, not just to the West, but to Muslims as well. What I mean by Muslims is I mean liberal Muslims, secular Muslims, reformists, and minority sects within Islam. Muslims are the first victims of Islamism, and yet she doesn't include anti-Islamism. Perhaps the inclusion of the term Zionism and not Islamism could be a sign of her anti-Semitism, or maybe I'm being a bit harsh at the moment. After all, biographies are limited to a certain number of characters, and perhaps she's just trying to keep it short, so I'll give her the benefit of the doubt for this. She then goes on to retweet Cage. For those of you who don't know who Cage actually are, they're actually an Islamist group disguised as a human rights advocacy group. Salman Rushdie supported Geeta Sahgal on this, a critic of Cage, by saying that Amnesty International has done its reputation incalculable damage by allying itself with Moazzam Begg and his group Cage Prisoners and holding them as a human rights advocates. The journalist Nick Cohen of The Observer also said that Amnesty thinks that liberals are free to form alliances with defenders of clerical fascists who want to do everything in their power to suppress liberals, most notably liberal-minded Muslims. Now, these two comments were made from Nick Cohen and Salman Rushdie. I suggest you Google them and find out who they are. They're both on the left of the political spectrum, and so they can't really be dismissed as centre-right neoconservatives who just criticise everything that Muslims do. Also, one of the key members of the group Cage, Asim Qureshi, has also been seen at various Hizb ut-Tahrir rallies. Now, Hizb ut-Tahrir are actually a very ultra-conservative Islamist group, and I wouldn't quite say they're as bad as Al-Mujahirun. I mean, those are the real nutcases who are there protesting 24/7 about every little thing. Hizb ut-Tahrir are they're campaigning for a caliphate, and they are pretty radical as well. So I think that discredits Cage even more. And in addition to this, some people who are on the far left, some ultra liberals like Sunny Hundal, have also gone on to condemn Cage. So I'm just trying to reinforce the point that, look, Cage are in the wrong here, and everybody seems to acknowledge it, apart from Katy Sian. And I'm guessing she probably is going to smear all of these critics of Cage as people on the right and who are spouting Islamophobic bigotry. Now, if you scroll down her Twitter feed, you can see that she's posted another 20-30 articles from the Guardian page regarding racism. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm totally against racism. In today's age, especially in Britain, it's really not a big issue. You occasionally see a handful of mugs giving you a bit of stick at the football, and I'm somebody who's pretty brown as well. But such incidences are quite rare these days. Looking at her profile, you'd probably get the impression that Britain is what Alabama was in the 1920s, where people are getting lynched, where there's a big racial divide in England, where there's tensions on the streets. But, you know, she's just really exaggerating it. In fact, I think she actually wants there to be more racism, so she could actually mindlessly retweet about 100 more articles from The Guardian about it. Okay, she then goes on to tweet that Ireland has become the first country to legalise gay marriage by popular vote. Okay, fair enough to her. She's against homophobia, hats off to her. I praise her for tweeting that, as I am quite liberal in that respect. But why then does she go on to support people or organisations like Cage? Asim Qureshi, one of the Cage spokespersons, is probably the most illiberal man you can find. He was on I think there was a show in the UK called The Big Questions, or The Daily Politics, or something like that. I'll post a link in the description below. And he actually couldn't condemn the stoning of a woman for adultery. If she's so in favour of human rights, and is against the use of torture in Guantanamo Bay and everything, she can still protest against it whilst at the same time distancing herself from Islamists. She could take an example from what Majid Nawaz does. He condemns the use of torture at Guantanamo, and he also defends the right of free expression. He's against the new counter-terrorism bills which Theresa May is introducing. So he's challenging this neoconservative ideology. But at the same time, he sees Islamism as a greater threat, and therefore he distances himself from the Islamists' cause. She also seems to be obsessed with white people. And it makes you think that she actually hates white people, even though she's quite light-skinned herself. One of the topics of a lecture she recently did was, "Why is my curriculum white?" She's also done various tweets like, "Well done, Salman Yaqub, for standing up to 4 white privileged patronising male bullies." Could you imagine if somebody was to replace the word white in that sentence with the word black? If somebody was to say, "Well done, so-and-so, for standing up to 4 black, privileged, patronising male bullies." Can you understand the amount of anger and resentment that sort of statement would get? She then goes on to tweet that Black Lives Matter. Well, yes, I agree with her on that. Of course, Black Lives Matter. I know a lot about the civil rights movement of the 1960s. I supported their cause. Martin Luther King, great guy. But what really winds me up about this Katy Sian is that she seems to pay no attention to racism when the perpetrator is not white. So, for example, she hasn't tweeted a thing about the racism of Arabs towards non-Arab Muslims in Qatar, for example, where the World Cup's going to happen in 2022. People say that they're working under slave conditions. You know, they arrive on the construction site, they get their passport stripped away from them, and they earn a very, very low wage. In fact, you can actually compare it to the treatment of blacks in America, during the 1800s, before the American Civil War. So she just relishes every opportunity she gets when the perpetrator is white, and I think that really shows that she has a hatred of white people. It turns out that she's also authored 2 books, and I've actually had a look at the books. They're pretty horrible. I'll do a separate video on both of the books which she's published. But you'd be surprised where she's actually published the books. You'd think that she might have tried, tipping the Guardian a bit of money, to do a book launch at their headquarters, or maybe she did. And they probably had a look at her profile. They weren't impressed. They said they gave a complete rejection. So who does she go for? She goes for an organisation called the Islamic Human Rights Commission. Now that sounds pretty liberal, human rights. I'm in agreement with that. However, if you actually look at their agenda, they actually appear to have a very neo-Khomeiniist agenda. For those of you who don't know, Ayatollah Khomeini was the spiritual leader of Iran after the revolution, and he was not liberal. I wouldn't even say he's neoconservative. I'd give him the title of far right. In fact, he's even more far right than the BNP. He was anti-gay, he was anti-women, he was anti-imperialism, but I think more importantly, he was anti-liberalism. and he really Islamized the whole of Iran. Right now, if you go to Iran, it's got one of the worst human rights records in the country, in the world, sorry. And this is who she decides to have her book launch with. It clearly has a very bad reputation. And then she keeps on retweeting somebody called Salman Syed, who published a book called Recalling a Caliphate. Now, caliphate, that word sounds pretty imperialist to me. I think it's a sort of, a very large country with a Muslim government, not a secular government, but a government with Sharia law. It's certainly an Islamist government which seeks to gain territory. Right now, they are actually causing a lot of harm in the Muslim world. They want to stabilize secular governments, secular Arab governments. In fact, the early Palestinian movements were actually Arab nationalist movements, but now they've been converted and radicalized into Islamist organizations who aren't a retaliatory group to Western imperialism, but in fact are imperialists of the opposite end of the spectrum. So I think it's very unwise of her to write in her biography that she's anti-imperialism, whilst at the same time she supports the Islamic Human Rights Commission, which has a pretty Islamist and imperialist agenda. And I think she's very against, the imperialism that the whites did during the colonial periods, where the whole of Europe and pretty much took over the whole of Africa and parts of Asia as well. I'm Indian. I'm against white imperialism. I'll give it that. But that was 100 years ago, and they have decolonized now. All of these governments today, which were once controlled by Europe, are now independent and are autonomous. So I don't think white people are doing the main form of imperialism. And yeah, she's just so deluded that I can't really explain it to you. I'm going to have to do 2 or 3 more videos on this, on Katy Sian, before I move on to some of the bigger people who I'd really like to refute and rebuke. I appreciate you all for watching this video. I'll definitely be uploading more videos now that my exam period's over. I actually do a pretty hard subject as well. I won't tell you what subject I do, but it's in the sciences. It's not in the social sciences, it's an actual science. And it's a lot harder than whatever the hell she does. Sociology at Manchester. And I can finally now de-stress and talk about the hypocrisy of certain individuals and really expose them. In the meantime, I'll be attaching a Christopher Hitchens clip with this video, which is all for you to see, and it links with the last point which I just made about Islamism and anti-imperialism. Islamists are not anti-imperialists, they are imperialists themselves.
Interruption there, I'm not sure what that was. I address you as an atheist and a secularist and a Marxist. I'm very much troubled by your remarks about the need to stand up and fight this Muslim jihad. I have no time for oppressive religion of any stripe, but I think you are well aware of the long history of crimes committed by the British government in Iraq, the United States government in Vietnam, and today in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm wondering how you can possibly say that it is Western civilization the civilization of the colonizers and the oppressors, who do it all, of course, in the name of liberation and democracy. How this is not the fundamental problem, rather than what you call the jihad of what I consider to be the response to the crimes of U.S. and European imperialism.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. There you have it. You see how far the termites have spread and how long and well they've dined. When someone can get up and say that in a meeting of unbelievers, that the problem is Western civilization, not the Islamic threat to it. That's how far the termites have got. Now, as a matter of fact, sir, I could have asked that question 50 times better than you did and answered it 50 times as comprehensively. If you'd like, I can, without conceit, refer you to a biography of mine of Henry Kissinger. That is a compendium and anthology of the war crimes committed by the United States and its allies in the Third World and elsewhere, and a call for those people, those responsible, to be arraigned for crimes against humanity and war crimes. It's a cheap paperback published by the New Left Review that anyone can get hold of, and I can't recommend too highly. One of those crimes, I'll just give you an example to show how utterly fatuous your implication is. One of those crimes was the arming and training of the Indonesian armed forces to take over the Republic of East Timor. Some of you are no doubt aware of this terrible atrocity. It's one of Noam Chomsky's best campaigns in writing, leading to the very near physical extirpation of the people of East Timor. A genocide more comprehensive than Cambodia, taking place a little afterwards, with our weapons, with our diplomatic protection, and with the endorsement of Kissinger and Ford. Hands up those who roughly remember this. Okay, not as good as I'd have liked, but still, and sad, but bear it in mind and look it up. Now, what are some of the items of the Al-Qaeda bin Laden manifesto? Well, oddly enough, and this was to my surprise, I thought it would be lower down. Item 3 in the charge against the West is that it reversed course on East Timor, tried to undo the genocide, brought East Timor to a referendum on independence, sent Jose Vieira de Mello, one of the greatest, Sergio Vieira de Mello, one of the greatest UN civil servants, to East Timor to supervise the transition to independence and the election, and made East Timor the newest member of the UN. Bin Laden says, "For this we will never forgive the Christian Crusaders and their imperialist friends. They took away a republic from a Muslim land, Indonesia." Most of the people of East Timor, by the way, are Christian and speak Portuguese. A detail. For this, we will never forgive them. For this, that was the reason they gave for blowing up the UN office in Iraq, because that's where Melio was sent next, with a truck bomb of explosives so enormous that it must have been borrowed from the former Iraqi army and Ba'ath Party. That's the reason they gave for blowing up the Australian tourists in Bali, in Indonesia, and the Indonesian taxi drivers who were servicing that resort, because they couldn't forgive the West for its behavior in East Timor. In other words, if you want to avoid upsetting these people, you have to let Indonesia commit genocide in East Timor. Otherwise, they'll be upset with you. You'll have made an enemy. If you tell them they can't throw acid in the faces of unveiled women in Karachi, they will be annoyed with you. If you say, we insist, we think that cartoonists in Copenhagen can print satire on the Prophet Muhammad, you've just made an enemy. You've brought it on. You're encouraging it to happen. So unless you're willing to commit suicide for yourself and for this culture, get used to the compromises you'll have to make and the eventual capitulation that will come to you. But bloody well don't do that in my name, because I'm not doing it. You surrender in your own name, leave me out of it. I'm going to fight these people and every other theocrat all the way. All the way. For free expression, for women's rights, for self-determination of small peoples, for the right of Iraqis to federate and have their own show, for the right of the Lebanese not to be bullied by Hezbollah and to have a multicultural democracy. Yes, I'll fight for this, and I think that the 82nd Airborne is brave to be fighting for it too. And I think you should be ashamed sneering at people who guard you while you sleep. Thanks.